The wedding ceremony was going according to plan. The guests were smiling, the bride looked dazzling, and the groom was nervously adjusting his tie. Everything was perfect until their puppy, a playful golden retriever named Max, caused chaos. Max, full of excitement, dashed toward the wedding cake. Before anyone could react, he leaped onto the table, sending the towering cake tumbling. Cream and decorations flew everywhere, leaving the guests in stunned silence. The bride gasped on the verge of tears while the groom tried to contain his shock. But Max wasn't done yet. He barked wildly and fixated his gaze on the table with the wedding gifts. His tail stood stiff, and he growled an unusual behavior for the normally affectionate and friendly puppy. The groom, Jake, stepped forward, attempting to calm him down. But Max refused to be soothed. A guest made a nervous joke about bad omens, but no one laughed. The bride, Emily, turned to the priest, pleading to continue the ceremony. But Max suddenly jumped onto the table and began furiously pouring at one particular gift, a small, old-looking box. Emily hesitated, then reached out, but as soon as her fingers touched the lid, Max barked sharply and grabbed her wrist gently but firmly with his mouth. This was strange for Max, who was usually gentle and well-behaved. Jake frowned. "This is ridiculous. Let's just open it and stop this nonsense." He lifted the box, but Max whimpered loudly, his ears flattened against his head. Despite the tension, Jake slowly peeled back the wrapping. Inside was an old doll wrapped in yellowed cloth. It had glass eyes that seemed to follow every movement, and a mouth slightly parted, as if mid-scream. The guests murmured amongst themselves. Who would bring such a thing as a wedding gift? Jake lifted the doll carefully, and as soon as he did, a strange creaking sound filled the air. Max's reaction was immediate. He jumped onto Jake's leg, barking at the doll with intense fear. The priest, who had been silently watching, stepped forward to intervene. However, when he reached out, Max growled and blocked him, his small body positioned protectively in front of Jake and Emily. "This doll is cursed," whispered an older guest, her voice shaky. The moment the words were spoken, the doll slipped from Jake's hands and landed face down on the floor. The lights flickered, and an eerie sound, like a child crying, echoed through the hall. Several guests gasped. Max let out a low, warning growl, his paws scratching at the floor near the fallen doll. "We need to find out where this came from," Jake said, looking around the room. But no one claimed responsibility for the gift. Then he noticed a small note inside the box's lid. It read, "Leave her alone, or the truth will be revealed." Emily's face paled. "I've seen this doll before," she murmured, "in my grandmother's old photo album, but it was lost decades ago." An elderly man stepped forward. "That's Margaret," he said gravely. "She belonged to your grandmother, but she was never meant to return." The room fell silent. The man told a chilling story how the doll had been passed down for generations, always followed by strange disappearances, fires, and tragedies. Each event had occurred after someone had handled the doll. Jake, despite his fear, resolved to end the mystery. "We need to return it to where it came from. That should stop whatever is happening." But as soon as he stepped toward the doll, it creaked again. Max's barking intensified. Then the lights went out entirely. A collective gasp filled the room. Only the faint sound of something shifting in the darkness could be heard. Someone turned on a phone flashlight, illuminating the doll. But now it lay in a different spot than before. Max suddenly whimpered and hid behind Emily, something he had never done before. The old man's voice was urgent. "This doll is a vessel. It was made to seal something away, but now it wants to be free." Emily clutched Jake's hand. "This is insane! It's just a wedding, not a horror story." But before anyone could react, the doll's glass eyes glowed red, and an unnatural laugh echoed through the room. Max barked wildly, his fur bristling. Then a strong wind seemed to sweep through the hall, knocking over decorations and sending guests running. "We have to end this," Jake yelled, grabbing the doll. But the moment he touched it, the laughter grew louder. Max lunged forward, biting at the doll's fabric. His small teeth ripped into the cloth, and a piercing wail rang out. The old man shouted over the chaos, "Take it back! To where it was first used!" Jake, Emily, and a few others, including Max, hurried to the church where Emily's grandmother had once lived. As they entered, Max's ear perked up, and he let out a soft whine. The air was thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The moment they reached the altar, the doll began to tremble in Jake's hand. "Put it back on the stone!" the old man cried. Jake did as told, setting the doll on a small carved pedestal. Instantly the ground shook and a chilling wind howled through the church. The doll's mouth opened wider as if screaming in rage. Max barked furiously, standing his ground despite the unnatural force pressing against them. Then, with a final ear-splitting crack, the doll crumbled to dust. The lights flickered back on, and the eerie presence lifted. Silence filled the church. Emily turned to Jake. "Is it over?" The old man nodded solemnly. "For now." Max let out a relieved bark and wagged his tail, licking Emily's hand as if to say, "We did it." They left the church, the cold night air filling their lungs. Max trotted beside them, his tail wagging happily, oblivious to the weight of what had just occurred. "I wonder what would have happened if Max hadn't stopped us from opening that gift," Jake murmured. Emily shuddered. "I'd rather not think about it." Max barked again, this time playfully, as if agreeing. They knew they would never forget that night. But the most important thing was they had made it out together.